On one of the hottest days of the summer, a black royal guard stood at his post outside Buckingham Palace, enduring the intense heat in his heavy uniform. As he observed a group of bikers approaching, he assumed they would be trouble, judging them by their rough exterior and loud engines, but what happened next was far from what he expected. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Have you ever been surprised by someone's kindness? Share your thoughts below. It was one of those blazing summer days in London where the air felt thick and suffocating, and the city seemed to pulse with heat. The Black Royal Guard stood tall, his uniform a heavy layer of red and gold, and the sun seemed to have its own agenda, beaming down relentlessly on him as he stood at his post outside Buckingham Palace. As he held his stance, barely able to wipe the sweat from his brow without breaking protocol, the heat made everything feel surreal. Tourists around him snapped photos, oblivious to the discomfort he endured, while his fellow guards remained perfectly still, as if nothing could affect them. The Royal Guard, with his stoic face and impeccable posture, was the symbol of British dignity, yet the intense summer heat tested even the most resilient of soldiers. As the minutes dragged on, the sounds of the city seemed to fade into the background. It was a typical day until a loud roar broke the monotony. The rumbling of motorcycle engines cut through the air as a group of bikers appeared on the horizon. The group, clad in leather jackets, tattoos, and wild looks, headed straight towards the palace gates. The guard's first instinct was to stiffen, his training kicking in as he immediately assumed they were troublemakers, eager to cause a scene. His mind raced, imagining loud confrontations, disruptions, or even insults. In his mind, this was just another day of dealing with unruly characters, and these bikers fit the stereotype perfectly. He braced himself for the worst, preparing for whatever might come. But when the bikers stopped in front of him, the unexpected happened. They weren't there to start trouble. Instead, they looked at him concerned about his discomfort in the heat. Without a word, one of them reached into their backpack and pulled out a bottle of cold water. The gesture was simple but sincere, and it was a moment that would surprise not only the guard, but everyone witnessing it. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in a world filled with assumptions and stereotypes, there are moments of unexpected kindness. The bikers, who had initially seemed like the last people who would offer help, looked at the guard with an expression of genuine concern. The heat was unbearable, and the guard's face, usually a mask of stoic composure, was beginning to show signs of strain. Sweat trickled down his face, and his breathing had become slightly labored under the weight of his uniform. For a moment, the air between the two groups seemed thick with tension. Would this be just another instance of judgment and assumptions? Or was something more human unfolding? The bikers, after all, were the kind of people that society often stereotyped. They were loud, rebellious, and their appearance alone was enough to make many assume that they lived outside the rules. The guard, raised to maintain the decorum of his position, might have instinctively placed these bikers in a category of other, a group to be avoided or distrusted. However, in that very moment, as the group of bikers dismounted their motorcycles and one of them stepped forward, the dynamic began to shift. The biker with the water bottle handed it over to the guard, who hesitated for a brief second. His mind was still processing the unexpected turn of events. "Take a sip, mate. You look like you're about to pass out," the biker said with a hint of humor in his voice, but there was no mockery, only genuine kindness. The guard stared at the bottle for a moment, still unsure how to react. It wasn't protocol to interact like this with the public, especially not with individuals who looked like they belonged to a different world altogether. His pride, his professionalism, and his training all whispered to him that he should decline the offer, keep his distance, and maintain his role. Yet the heat, the exhaustion, and the undeniable gesture of goodwill made it difficult to refuse. Reluctantly, the guard took the bottle, his hands slightly trembling as he unscrewed the cap. As the cold water touched his lips, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The coolness a stark contrast to the oppressive warmth of the day. It wasn't just the water. It was the humanity of the gesture that caught him off guard. For a brief moment, the guard felt the walls around his carefully cultivated image begin to crumble. In the face of this simple act of kindness, his assumptions about these bikers who he'd once judged for their appearance and reputation started to fade. It was a reminder that the labels we assign to people, based on their looks, their background, or their lifestyle, are often nothing more than surface-level judgments. As the guard wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, he looked up at the group. The bikers were smiling, their faces a mix of warmth and pride. Not from arrogance, but from knowing that they had done something good. The guard found himself questioning everything he had thought he knew about the world, about the bikers, and about his own perceptions. It wasn't about race, status, or even the political divisions that often separated people. It was about something simpler, human kindness, shared in a moment of need, without hesitation or judgment. The scene was so unexpected that even the nearby tourists who had been snapping pictures of the guard's traditional posts stopped for a moment, realizing they had witnessed something much more profound. For the guard, this moment would be a turning point, one that challenged everything he had come to understand about people, perception, and even himself. He had been trained to stand firm, to remain unyielding, to protect the image of the monarchy. Yet here he was, receiving kindness from a group of people who, by society's standards, might not have fit into his preconceived notions of what a respectable person should look like. It made him wonder how many times he, and people in general, had missed the chance to connect with others because of these assumptions. The Black Royal Guard stood there, still holding the water bottle in his hand, his mind racing. The group of bikers, who had initially seemed like the last people to offer him any form of help, had completely changed his perspective in a matter of moments. He had been raised to view his role as one of discipline, respect, and stoic composure. And here he was, standing on the hallowed grounds of Buckingham Palace, receiving water from a group of leather-clad bikers. It wasn't just the unexpected act of kindness that had left him speechless. It was the realization that his own assumptions about others could be so deeply flawed. He had looked at the bikers and immediately labeled them as troublemakers, thinking their loud motorcycles and tough exterior meant they were the kind of people who didn't care about anyone but themselves. Yet, here they were, offering him something as simple as water without any strings attached. As he drank, the cool water providing relief from the scorching sun, he couldn't help but reflect on how his training and the public image he upheld had influenced his judgment. The Royal Guard was more than just a soldier. They were symbols of tradition, duty, and the monarchy. Their presence was meant to evoke respect, to show a sense of order and control. But the reality was that this role often isolated them from the everyday lives of the people they were meant to serve. The Guard had rarely had the opportunity to engage with regular citizens, and when he did, the encounters were brief and impersonal. The bikers, on the other hand, lived outside the norms of British aristocracy. They were loud, they were visible, and they lived life on their own terms. Yet, they had shown him something far more valuable than the control he maintained through his rigid role. They had shown him empathy, compassion, and understanding. The Guard could feel the warmth of the sun bearing down on him, but the more he thought about the bikers, the more he realized how much they had challenged the narrative he had built for himself. He had assumed that people like them, who had a reputation for being rebellious and unapologetic, could never understand the pressures he faced as a member of the Royal Guard. But in that simple moment, when they offered him a bottle of water, they demonstrated a level of compassion that many others, from his own circle to the general public, could never have imagined. The reality was, the bikers had more in common with him than he had initially thought. Both of them, in their own ways, had been judged by society. He for the uniform he wore, and they for the lifestyle they had chosen. Yet, despite the labels they had been given, both sides had something valuable to offer. The Guard, in a rare moment of reflection, thought about the stereotypes that were so deeply ingrained in society. He had grown up in a world that had taught him to respect authority, tradition, and the values of the monarchy. But he had also been taught to be cautious of those who didn't fit into that world. His own upbringing had perpetuated certain assumptions about people based on their appearances, their occupations, and their backgrounds. The bikers, with their rough exterior and rebellious attitude, seemed so different from him, so far removed from the world of royal ceremonies and grand affairs. Yet in this moment, they had shown him the value of breaking free from those stereotypes. In the simplest and most unexpected way, they had reminded him that people could surprise you, that kindness could come from places you never expected, and that assumptions based on appearance often told you very little about the true nature of someone. As the bikers smiled and waved before leaving, the guard felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just a royal guard anymore, standing rigid and distant from the world around him. He was a person, someone who had the capacity to connect with others and to recognize that those who appeared the most different might in fact be the most similar. The guard had expected judgment, criticism, or even confrontation from the bikers. Instead, he had received something much more powerful, an opportunity to question his own preconceived notions and to let go of the barriers that had kept him distant from the people around him. As he stood at his post, the heat of the sun still pressing down on him, he couldn't help but think that this moment would stay with him for a long time. It wasn't just about the kindness the bikers had shown him. It was about the lesson they had unknowingly taught him, that kindness, respect, and understanding could transcend appearances, and that even in a world filled with judgments and stereotypes, human connection could break through the hardest walls. As the days passed, the royal guard couldn't help but carry the lessons from his unexpected encounter with the bikers. The simple act of kindness had turned his worldview upside down, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much he had taken for granted in his role. He had always prided himself on his ability to stand still, to embody the stoic image of a royal guard, but now he began to wonder if perhaps that image was incomplete. His training had taught him to maintain a rigid control over his emotions, to never show weakness or vulnerability, but the bikers had shown him that true strength wasn't about control. It was about connection. The guard's encounter with the bikers had shattered his assumptions, and now, as he continued to serve, he carried with him a new sense of awareness. He still stood at his post, still upheld the traditions of the royal guard, but now he saw the people who walked by in a different light. He understood that, despite their different backgrounds or appearances, everyone shared a fundamental humanity. The bikers, with their rough exteriors, had been the ones to remind him of this simple truth. They hadn't been defined by their tough image. They had shown that even the most seemingly out-of-place people could have a heart full of compassion. The royal guard also began to see his role not just as a symbol of monarchy, but as a bridge between people from all walks of life. He realized that while he was a part of an institution that represented tradition and power, he could still embrace the lessons of kindness, empathy, and respect for all. The experience had opened his eyes to the idea that being a figure of authority didn't mean being distant or disconnected from those around him. Instead, it meant being present, being compassionate, and recognizing the shared experiences that bound people together, no matter their background. In the end, the guard understood that the most valuable lessons often came from the most unexpected places. He never imagined that a group of bikers so different from him in appearance and lifestyle would teach him so much about the true meaning of strength. And as he stood at his post each day, now more mindful of the people around him, he knew that he had become a better person, a better royal guard, because of it. His encounter with the bikers had shown him that it was possible to be both strong and compassionate, rigid and open, symbolizing tradition while embracing humanity. And that, he realized, was the real strength of the royal guard.